Truth be told, I can't stand interactive notebooks. There, I said it. Sorry, not sorry. There's just too much cutting and gluing and folding, and it takes so much class time. Hit that like button if you feel the same way so I know I'm not alone. So what do I use instead of interactive notebooks? Well, that's what I'm sharing in today's video. If you're new here, I'm Rachel Vincent, and I love sharing ways to help teachers simplify their classrooms and their teaching. Okay, so if you aren't even sure what an interactive notebook is, there's lots of different ways to have an interactive notebook. There are ways where on one side of the notebook you have all of your notes, and on the other side students respond or put their thinking, their drawings, or whatever. Another way is to have foldables inside of your notes. So you have flaps and pieces and all these different components that require cutting and gluing and folding. And I'll be honest, I gave it the old college try. Like, we went gung-ho with it, and it was like, I can't do this multiple times a week for our notes because it takes us so long just to get the pieces set up that we don't ever get to the content in which the notes are to help. So then I decided to use guided notes, especially when I taught third grade. Students were tested in ELA, math, science, and social studies. So I wanted to make sure that students had a resource that they could use to help them as we went through all of the content for the year. So when it was time for state testing, they would have this notebook of information that they could go back and look at before testing. For both science and our social studies standards at the time, I created these guided notes to where as I was teaching it, we would fill it out, and all they had to do was just glue one little half sheet into their notebook. And it worked wonderfully. So now I do something similar, except I don't always have guided notes. Sometimes we have guided notes, but honestly, what I really use is I just give the students their notes, and we use the notes as we're learning in class. So I have math. I do an ELA notebook that includes reading, writing, grammar, and word study, and then we have our science notebook. So we have 3 notebooks for our students. Math, I break up by the topic that we're teaching. So we start with place value, then we move on to multiplication, division, fractions, so on and so forth. We glue in tabs into our notebook so that students can find the information, because what I found is once we move on from a unit, students would forget how to do something, and I would be working with other students during small group time while they were reviewing a skill, and I wouldn't be able to help them refresh their memory of what I had already taught them. I knew they knew it, they just needed the reminder of how to do it. So that's where our notebooks really became a resource for students. So when a student would get stuck and forgot how to round or forgot what factors were, I could say, go check your notebook, it's in the place value section, or it's in the multiplication section, and then they could find the notes that helped them to solve the problem that they were stuck on. So it really became this resource for students that was standards-based, that matched exactly what we taught, especially because our math textbook does not align exactly with our standards. So we will use our math textbook as a resource. We pull from it the lessons that match. We were no longer in a place, and I don't know if it was just my district, I don't know if it's how textbook companies are and standards are, that they just don't align. They've never aligned, to be quite honest. But when I first started teaching, you used to just go through the textbook, no matter the subject, and that was your teaching. But it's no longer the case that way. So I needed a way to create a resource that students could access that wasn't their textbook because their textbook didn't have it, that wasn't me because I was busy helping other students, and wasn't just like, go Google it. So once I realized how beneficial the math was, then I switched my focus to our ELA notebooks, and I was like, okay, math, we've got it down. We've been doing that for several years. It works wonderfully. Like, we have all the components we need to make a great math resource notebook. So now let's do ELA. So I have my reading section, which contains what theme is, because for some reason they always forget theme, or point of view, or all of the different skills in reading comprehension that they need to access. Text structures, things that sometimes when they get to a question that says what text structure is, they just forget. They can remember like one or two text structures, but they don't know them all. And so this again was a resource for them to go back and look, oh, here is problem and solution. I forgot about that one. And so then I did it with our writing. Writing is more of the processes. So it has like their editing checklist, their revising checklist. I do have like what the different genres we write, but it's more of a, they use that portion of their notebook while they're writing. So it helps them. It's not necessarily for review. Grammar is something I really beefed up this year. I created the notes that go along with every single standard we teach, because again, when we do our review sheets, our weekly review sheets, some of those skills that we had many lessons on earlier in the year come back around and they forget what a subordinated conjunction is, or they forget the different tenses for progressive verbs. So having a resource that they can go to and say, okay, here is notes on progressive verbs. Now I remember how to figure out which one's past, present, and future, or whatever the case may be. And I allow my students to actually use their notebooks on tests. Yes, I know they can't use it at the end of the year state testing. I know they can't use it on our district benchmarks, but I feel like part of my job is to get them ready for that. And if they are able to help themselves find the information they need in our notebooks in order to solve a problem or to answer a question, then I'm going to let them. The notes don't give answers. It reminds them of definitions. It reminds them of the strategies or the process to solve or answer questions. The way I see it is if a student was to ask me that question, I would guide them the same way that the notes do. So it's just an extra resource besides me being the only one that has all the answers. They have access to the answers or how to find the answers in their notebooks. Now our science notebooks had some guided notes, had some glue-in notes. It was sort of a mixture. We just changed standards this past year. And so I'll be quite honest, the science notebook was sort of like on the back burner. Like when we had notes, we glued it in and we just kind of let it go. My plan is to really beef up my science notebook this year. Now that I have our math and our ELA notebook dialed in, like now my focus will be on making sure we have our science. Because again, like I said, they're great resources all year long. And then before testing, I send them home and I say, okay, use these to go over, have your parents help you study them as you are working and trying to refresh your memory. We use them in our test review leading up to state testing days. And it's just overall a really great way to use notebooks that don't require that cutting and folding and gluing. Now we still glue, but I do the cutting because I'm cutting the sheets in half. I pass them out and they glue them in and we're good to go. If you're interested in seeing how I launch ELA and math workshop and how we set up our notebooks at the beginning of the year, check out the video that's on your screen now.